So when we talk about community of learners and community of learning, and we talk about icebreakers, when we bring a student or a body of students into a learning environment, each environment's going to be different. You've got your brick and mortar schooling environment where you're face to face. You've got your synchronous online learning where you're learning, let's say, in a WebEx environment or in an environment such as Blackboard Collaborate. Or you're doing completely asynchronous as we do at AMU, where we're given the tasking to communicate with each other and to provide and bounce ideas off of each other, but that none of it's done at a synchronous time frame. The ways in which I believe that you need to bring these communities together actually is very, very similar. Each of us bring to the table a different style of learning and a different method of managing what we learn. And so when we do that, we have to understand where each of our compatriots in the learning paradigm are coming from, whether that's the learner or the instructor. And oftentimes what I think is necessary is an introduction of who you are and your general background. So I would say my name is Paul. I either go by Jay, because Jay is something I've been called for 15 years. And I am an ex-military member who has some graduate education. So I know how the learning paradigm works, and I know that most of our learning needs to be collaborative. Well, we'll find that there are some students that don't have that do not have the capacity or the training to bring a collaborative learning environment together. And in order to buy into the fact that they're going to learn, especially in an asynchronous environment, one has to be sure that you're dealing with people that are part of the team. And so that introduction, that who are you, who am I, is a huge piece in bringing our teams together. And we do that every time, I think, at AMU. At the start of the class, there's always an introductory piece. Who are you? What have you done? Where are you from? Why are you here? And in adult learning, the why are you here is probably the biggest piece of that puzzle. The why are you here says, I am here because I wish to achieve X. Not I'm here because somebody told me to be here, which is what you're probably going to find in a secondary school student, in a high school student. I'm here because they tell me that until I'm 18 I got to be here from 8 to 4:30 or whatever that time frame might be, and that's how it is. They don't want to be there. This introductory type of environment doesn't work in that particular learning paradigm because they're not a body of professional learners. They're not there to learn something they want to know. They're there to learn something they must know. So when we talk about collaborative learning, we have to understand each other's weaknesses and strengths. Part of that introductory program is to do that. I have learned this, this, and this. I'm good at bringing numbers together. I'm good at taking statistical information and saying, here's what it says. Someone else might be good at presentations. I like to do a lot of presentations. I like to speak to my audience. And so that's something that I like to talk about. And I take that on as a strong piece of who I am. My learning partners, including the instructor, need to know that. They need to understand where their weak points in learning can be supplanted or supported by those who have strong points. So we get two pieces of that. One is an introduction, so we know we're not talking to robots. We've passed the Alan Turing test. We know that we're not dealing with a faceless robot with no sense of goal, no want to be there, no want to achieve. And that's what the general introduction does. Now when we talk about our backgrounds, which I think, even though it's part of the same introductory, part of the same icebreaker, it not only allows us to see the person as who they are, but it also allows us to see from their own perspective what their weaknesses may and their strengths may or may not be. What have you done previously that brings you to this point? What have you learned previously that will bring you successfully through this course? And so from the student perspective, that allows us to enter into those collaborative efforts and say, hey, I'm good at this, you're good at that. We'll put this together and we'll make it a good program. We'll make it a good outcome. For the instructor, he can see the same thing. He or she can see the same thing. I know that this guy probably hasn't dealt with this before, so maybe there'll be a little bit more of sidewise instruction, something that they might inquire about during that learning time, and something I need to put on, on a little pad, or these days electronically. Hey, X student is probably going to reach out to me because they've already said that this is their case. In my case, I have a traumatic brain injury. I said that in the introduction. I also brought forward a disability services agreement, which stated the assistance that I might need. Those two pieces together support the need for perhaps increased tutoring, increased information, a little bit more guidance, perhaps. Without that introduction, without that information, you as the instructor and you as the learner are kind of going into it blind. And nobody wants to go into any situation blind. In the military, you certainly don't go in blind. You want all the information you can have. And so an ice-breaking environment sets us up for both success in terms of knowing who our fellow learners are and who our instructor is, what their background is, and what their strengths are. What do they lean to in terms of rubrics? What do they lean to in terms of their expectations? Each instructor is different because they've learned to teach in different ways, and so it allows us not just to understand each other and not just to be supportive and say that person's there, this person's here, we're a team, because we are a team. It allows us to also identify weaknesses and strengths, and it also allows us to develop a proper position of learning. We go from what Lieberman calls congeniality to collegiality. So what that basically would intone is that we go from an environment where we get to know each other in a relaxed environment, but we go from that relaxed learning environment to an understanding of skill sets, an understanding of where each person is on that scale of learning, and where we need maybe to add additional pieces and remove pieces when there's no need for that. When everyone's coming in to a certificate program, such as this is for me, I've already done postgraduate work. You don't necessarily need to hop on APA citations, because those have been my bread and butter for 7 years. But for other people who are coming into this prior to an associate's degree, who've maybe used MLA in high school, and 20 years out of school, they've never done anything but MLA, they are going to need that additional guidance on, hey, this is how an APA piece of work is formatted. Doesn't matter what you did before, this is how we do it. So it's those additional pieces. So not only are we bringing each other into a friendly environment, an environment of trust, an environment of support, which is the congeniality part, we're also bringing each other in to an environment where we can efficiently and effectively learn, becoming able to project that collegiality, that ability to learn, taking the tools of learning and extrapolating them beyond simply parroting back the information that we're given. And when we look at that, we can also say that our big idea, our big intentions are removing any barriers to success. As I said before, we're talking about removing any deficiencies that the student may think that they have. If they believe that they're not as well versed in a certain aspect of learning, but it turns out they do know very, very well how to complete this task, we can support them and say, hey, you don't need any extra guidance. You're able to do this yourself. And you've shown that through telling us that you've written reports for the military, you've written reports for an agency that you work for, you've written reports for the company you've worked for. You know how to write. You don't need to be told how to set forward an introduction, a discussion, and a conclusion. You already know that. It may not have come from a collegiate environment, fair enough. But in that congeniality phase, we develop that. We know where people are. We can form opinions about what they're going to achieve and what they're not going to achieve. And I think when we look at that in terms of self-actualization, as I talked about last week, we're looking at where somebody is on that scale. Are they in a position to state clearly and succinctly what their final actual goal is? If we can't, then we have to we have to go back to that back to that more congenial environment and get a little bit more friendly, so to speak, a little bit less. You get a B because of this. We say, hey, we graded it this way because. And so it moves simply just beyond the ice-breaking phase. The ice-breaking phase, of course, is where you're going to introduce yourself, introduce each student, and say, here's what you need to do to be part of this learning community, to be part of this learning paradigm. And you promote learners and leaders through that. You say to somebody, you've done this for 15 years. You know what you're doing. Somebody says, I was logistics for 22 years in the U.S. Army. And I know how to take numbers and turn them into reports. Well, that person doesn't need to be a learner. That person can now be a leader. And it gives empowerment to our students. It doesn't make them feel as though they don't have the skill sets, the conceptualizations, or the willingness to learn. We go beyond. Again, we go beyond giving students simple information and having them parrot it back. We set up the environment for them to learn, for them to be collaborative, and for them to feel like this is an open and willing environment. If we don't do that, if we set the environment up and say, here's what you got to learn, here's how you're going to learn it, I'm going to grade it, it's going to be in by this date, I don't care if you've got any other issues, I don't care what you did before, here's how we do it now, then we lose a large part of our students' willingness to learn and our students' ability to learn. And they're learning things they don't need to learn, things they've already known about for years. So I think that's the biggest piece for us there. We create communities by empowering, by enduring friendships and enduring those pieces that we've already known and already extrapolated upon, things that we've already known about for years. We don't need to learn it. And developing a plan and an understanding of our students' strengths and weaknesses. We already know that Bill knows how to write reports, but Tessa has been a housewife for 14 years, never done it. Never had to do it since she left high school. Well, there's going to be a need for some additional training there. And that's where both the sense of community comes into place. We know that we can rely on some students to be guidance tools for others. We know where we can set up our collaborative teams. It may allow us to say, when we set up a team for a group project, we now know how we're going to subdivide those students. Okay, this guy, he's going to be the lead, and we're going to move other people into that, so that we know that we can create that smaller community for that collaborative learning piece. Of course, we're all learning together, but if we do that, we create sense of community within these small training groups, these small learning groups. And we work with everyone's strengths, and we work to mitigate everyone's weaknesses. Everyone has strengths, everyone has weaknesses. And that is the purpose and point of creating communities in a learning environment, going from, as we said before, congeniality, being friends, and becoming aware of each other, that we are, whilst we're in an asynchronous environment, where we're all here to learn, and we're all here to learn the same thing, but we're going to learn it in a different fashion, and we're looking at strengths and weaknesses. What's going to turn that friendly, genial person who has this wealth of experience but doesn't know how to apply it? How are we going to turn that person into a college leader, into a learning leader, and into a leader of others? That's our purpose. Now, it does require us to make sure that people respond, and of course, there are some hurdles to that. Some people have some issues with that. But that's something that we have to address through our social interactions with people. We don't, make any assumptions, and we don't ask them to make assumptions. We simply say, hey, who are you? Where are you coming from? What are you trying to learn? That's the building block. That's the starting block. From there, everything else falls together, and we will create an environment in which we create strong, leading learners and people who can collaborate together. And as instructors, we can find out who is going to be strong in one area, weak in another, and develop our learning plans appropriately. Thanks once again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure making this piece. I do hope I've covered all of the bases, and there will be references coming along with this piece as well. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend and a great Christmas, since the next time I post one of these will be after Christmas. Thanks again.